by someone named Thompson. If you could read that for us.
Where it says, man knows no master, save
Yes.
creating heaven, or those when choice and common good ordained. It's very small, very difficult to read.
Let me improve that for you. There we go.
Oh, that's
Any
a whole
thoughts?
lot better.
Great. Any thoughts on this sort of kickoff that Paine chooses to start his 42-page pamphlet with?
Well, I think he could probably add to choice and common good random chance.
Okay.
It's sort of a who wrote that? Guy named Thompson?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Who is he?
I don't know yet, but we may find out in our. I'll do the research and come back next session.
Really don't make much sense to me.
Well,
Man knows no master.
Paine,
Huh?
Thomas Paine is trying to justify that common men, in some sense, or the populace at large, ought to have a say in how the government is run. So this verse or writing by Thompson is concerned with who is in charge, who is a master.
Well, basically, it says, man knows no master, save,
Save creating heaven. In other words, unless God ordains a master.
Yeah, it's sort of vague. I mean, the thing is to me, it's very vague. Or those whom choice and common good ordain. I mean, that makes a little bit of sense there. Basically, to me, it's sort of like saying that those who do make their own choices and out of goodness, and it's ordained, sort of creates their own heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Which is somewhat true.
I've thought that the creating heaven could be the. I sense that could be connected to the pursuit of happiness idea. That'll come later on this year, in 1776 in the Declaration of Independence. Okay. All right. We already did the introduction last week. If you missed it, you can read the archive. We're jumping right into Of the Origin, Design of Government in General, with concise remarks on the English Constitution. Mike, would you like to read for us the first paragraph or two?
Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections. The latter, negatively, by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse. The other creates distinctions. The first, a patron. The last, a punisher.
Any comments?
I like the word punisher.
Why is that?
You probably don't want to know.
I do. I have to know.
Let's hear
All
it.
right, I'll tell you why. Because punisher is a symbol that Q, if anybody knows who Q is, used to talk about all the time. And I actually have to wear a mask once in a while when I go into a restaurant. And punisher is the picture on my mask.
Right. Have you watched the movie The Punisher based on the comic book?
No, I never did, but I know supposedly Paine is coming and the Punisher is going to give the pain.
Okay, so the Punisher, that symbol, which was popularized in a movie, but actually before then came out of a comic book series called The Punisher. My
son-in-law did tell me about that, but I don't know the background.
Prior to both those, however, I just have to mention this. one of the things I recall, and I don't recall who necessarily said it, beware those who would seek to punish. And that's just something that triggered in my mind. But it's saying that the government, or at least Paine, back in his work here, is saying that that the government is the punisher. So I guess what you're saying then is you'd like the government to step up and kind of set things in order. Is that a fair assessment?
I'd like to see the military step up and set things in correct order. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go along with that.
What else do we get out of this? How about the idea that society is produced by our wants? Something I think I picked up on within the last few weeks is the idea that a government seems to atrophy society. So, for instance, in the generation of men closer to Dave and Mike's age, there would be various organizations such as the Rotary Club and, well, you name it. There was a whole realm of societies and voluntary associations of groups who would get together to try to make the world a better place. They'd pick a mission, they'd pursue that for a year, 2 or 3, and they'd make a real difference and impact in the world. As government has gotten larger and larger, one of the things that goes along with that are people becoming more comfortable in not doing that so much, and maybe asking or expecting the government to do that on their behalf, which I think is dangerous.
Well, I don't know. To me, I mean, the thing is, like right now, technology has been introduced into everybody's life in a way that never was for centuries or for millennia, really. So the thing is, it's something that we've all had to deal with, in the past, say, 30 or 50 years, maybe. And the thing is, it does something to also create its own society and also its own government as well. So, when we're talking about society and various societies within the society, like I say, now the thing is technology has a very important part that, it has not been split out as to what's really good for people through technology and what is really sort of disruptive and bad through technology. So we get sort of a mess, you might say, of this whole thing coming together to create societies that, I don't know, they're good or bad, because you see what's happening now with our own society that we live in. There's so many different little societies. And I know you referred to different organizations with society at the end of them, but you also have union societies. You have capitalist societies within inside of this that all have their own sort of spoken language and spoken way of doing things that may not necessarily agree with one another.
So I think we're in a transitional period.
But no doubt about that.
And we're not sure how to deal with it yet, because some have way too much power and the rest of us thought we could just let that happen. And now we're seeing that there's corruption and control.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's ever been a time where there hasn't been corruption and some people trying to exact some sort of control.
Yeah, but it seems like when we first started this country, that people were volunteering to be in government positions because they love the country. Now it seems like they're staying in position for way too many terms because they love the money.
Well, to me, there's been a separation, when you're looking at the government and the people running the government. You can I just break it down in 2 ways. You have the attorneys that are running the government, and then you have the people that are business owners that are in there also trying to run the government. And the thing is, because the attorneys are so much more familiar with the law, they know how to manipulate the law. And actually, the people that are the capitalists or the ones that are business owners, they don't have that knowledge that the the attorneys do, and therefore sometimes they're able to run rings around the people, because even as a business owner, you have to consult the attorney and listen to what they say as to what is right or wrong. So therefore, they gain authority above, just about above everybody, and they use it too to manipulate people for their own benefit. So I don't know what can ever be done about this sort of thing, because if you take an attorney, they have nobody that can stop them if they're doing something wrong, because it's their own profession that actually, disciplines them, and they shake hands and they do things, pat each other on the back and everything, and they won't do anything to destroy each other. It's sort of like, once, I don't know, one of these old guys, Aristotle or somebody said, the worst thing that destroys a government or a society more than anything else is nepotism and cronyism, which I think is totally true.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Does anyone have any other ideas regarding this first paragraph? We'll move forward. Who would like to read the second? Would you like to continue, Mike?
All right. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver, but that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence, which in every other case advises him out of two evils to choose the least. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us with the least expense and greatest benefit is preferable to all others.
Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is a necessary evil, in its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer, we are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government. Our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer.
Well,
let's stop right there. Go ahead.
Okay, a couple of comments. I'm not at all sure society in every state is a blessing. I think it depends on which society you're dealing with. I have certainly read about societies which have been thoroughly unpleasant, rather primitive societies. Read about the Dobu Islanders sometimes, a society where every man and woman's hand was turned against everyone else. As for government, I suspect that in some sense, when Thomas Paine is thinking about government, talking about government, he is in a setting back in the 18th century in Europe, where governments tended to overpower all other centers of power in a given society. I think in some sense, whether or not government is an evil depends on whether or not you are in a situation where there are no countervailing centers of power in society to the governmental structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking of the old Robin Hood story. The idea of you're having to pay taxes, the sheriff is going around collecting them, and that's just to keep that force up to keep the taxes going. And the countervailing force, of course, there is Robin Hood and his band of merry men. And there was something like that prior, back in the peasants' revolt in the 17th century in England, and the English Civil War. And if please have your microphone on mute if not speaking. Let's continue unless anyone would like anything else to say about the furnishing the means by which we suffer. I don't know that we suffer so much by government necessarily, although it is possible that we do. And certainly if you find yourself ever incarcerated, then it's very hard to get out of that situation, because we have a 13th Amendment. We've got the echo again. Okay, but it's okay, there we go. And that amendment basically produces slaves for the state. If you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, then you become a slave for the state, which the state can then lend out to businesses. And I know there are probably still today a number of jurisdictions where I wouldn't be surprised if municipalities or perhaps officials are gaining rather profitably by using their prison labor as very, very cheap labor that they can, if they're applying it directly to county highway cleanup works projects, that's fine. But if they're using it and selling the labor to companies that are making a large profit, and the people who are handing out the people are making a profit, then that can certainly be a reduction in human liberty. We've got certain laws that have been set up that seems like they just grow and grow, and they don't decrease, so that you don't know if you're going to be breaking them one day, because they keep on adding new ones on. And then next thing you know, America becomes more in the direction of like a gulag or like a concentration camp. And I think that is probably in the back of a number of people's minds today, more so than it was perhaps a few years ago.
You know, Robbie, to me, just in thinking about this here, society in every state is a blessing. I think that's false. I think it's just the opposite. I think the blessing, society in every state is really evil. And it's in the fact that when you take a look at different societies, you know, even from a capitalist society to a communist society, a socialist society, these all have their evilness that's inside of them, you know, that takes and really creates the governments that are become evil inside of themselves. It says, but the thing is, this is referring to a government in its best state. Well, a government in its best state is supposedly the United States, composed of the Declaration of Independence and the rest of it. You know, I think is pretty much a good thing and not evil, as long as it can be upheld, you know, amongst the society of the people that understand it and that live inside of it. But when you take a look at different societies, they only have their own benefit and their own interest in mind in order to take and move forward. And quite frequently, they even have their own languages that they're speaking, their own terms that mean certain things only to the group that's a part of the society. To others, you know, it could be very foreign. So I think this thing, to me, in my opinion, is sort of backwards.
Backwards in that you feel that governments are good and societies are bad?
No, I think the different societies in every state they say is a blessing. It's only a blessing if you're part of that society, but if you're not part of that society, okay, then it's not really a blessing. It could be something that is just the opposite to you. You take like our government. You take the society of the Democrats versus the society of the Republicans, and then all the different societies inside of those two major societies. You know, on some hands, there's some things that are really good, and then on the other hand, there's some things that are really, really bad. And between the two, they find themselves in very much in opposition because of the foundation of the societies themselves. I don't know if you follow me at all with what I'm saying or not. But
I am reminded of what I have read about the history of Iceland. If you read the Icelandic sagas, they tell you about a society with no government. Iceland was settled by people fleeing generally from Norway, chieftains who were fleeing from Norway because Norway was being united into a kingdom, and they wanted to come to a place where they didn't have any kings or they didn't have a government. And they set up a society that lasted for a long time. And in that society, you had this patchwork of chieftains all over Iceland. And wherever you lived, you had to fit in well with that local chieftain, and you had to butter him up and do whatever he said. And it could be a very hard, harsh society. That's readily seen from the sagas. And there were often all sorts of bloody feuds that were going on. So I would not accept, just off the top of my head, the idea that society in every state is a blessing.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
So we're operating then. This is one of those sort of inspirational documents, and the inspirational document is written by a guy who left school at 13, but was already in a very highly developed society, 18th century England, London specifically. So he came from a lot of advantages, where perhaps there were things like I don't know if the British Mutual Aid Society was around as early as the 18th century. I know it was there in the 19th and early 20th. But he's speaking, I think, from a position of privilege then, and that's sort of his how his view is flavored. So he might not have too many bad examples, and then he's trying to say that the good is with society and the bad is with government. I think if you're taking it, let's say, from perhaps a Christian perspective, you might think that the good is with all people, or the bad is with all people, and the good is with God. And that's a different perspective. And last time we discussed a little bit of how Paine was a deist. And then later on in his life, he actually renounces Christianity, which makes him rather unpopular. But when he was writing this, he was writing it from a perspective of trying to use a lot of Protestant speech. And he probably wasn't to the point of being willing to denounce Christianity at that point. Does someone else have something to say?
Well, I think he was. Go ahead.
Echo.
Right.
I just said it was echoing. So.
Okay.
I think Paine.
Yes.
I think Paine was writing from the perspective of someone who felt that the royal government had grown, in some sense, both too powerful and unjust in its behavior toward people below it, not just the common people, but some of the people who were propertied, not necessarily nobility, but people like businessmen. And he wanted to justify that these lower classes should have some control as opposed to the royal government having control. And he was a bit of a radical in that he probably pretty much tossed out the justification for the royal government having any power.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's certainly the case. His father owned a corset shop in London. And just 100 years earlier, remember the monarchy was gotten rid of, and then it was brought back in with King George I, I believe, or there might have been a few before then. I'm not an expert in British history. So they knew that it was possible to exist in England without a monarchy because they did it at least for a while, and then they brought a new one in. But then by the time you got to King George III and him having suffered his own form of madness, and then perhaps a number of opportunists getting into Parliament, I do sense that he was a radical, and he was also something of an experimenter, because he was coming over here thinking, oh, well, here's an excellent opportunity to try out some ideas.
You're talking about Thomas Paine, right?
Yes.
I don't know. The more I see about this guy, I don't know. I read a little bit about him, not a lot, but what I'm seeing here, him and Thomas Jefferson were very, very different, I guess. Even though this guy Thomas Paine come up with this idea of common sense, common sense is relative to a person's environmental habituation, what they're used to. You can make common sense of what you know, but to make common sense of what another person knows is sometimes very difficult to do, even though you may have things that may be similar or things that you may agree on that disagree upon, So I don't know. I'm sort of curious to know, what common sense are we talking about here? Thomas Paine was talking about common sense, because I don't know, so far what I'm seeing is not too much common sense, but it does reflect what you're saying, Rami, about the fact that he came here 2 years, before he started, I guess, publishing this stuff, and the background that he had in England, would sort of, justify these words that he's saying, which I think would be rather different than a lot of the patriots that he moved himself into.
Right. And so Thomas Jefferson being a Virginian, and Thomas Paine being an Englishman, Jefferson having a lot more probably advantage in family wealth too, having probably being more being better read. I think we get an idea of what Paine's idea of common sense here is in the sentence. I'm just going to read again. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. So his common sense is the idea that conscience itself, the impulses of conscience, simply followed. If everyone's conscience was more or less the same, he's trying to say, then we wouldn't need laws or government to administer them. Because conscience alone would be enough to drive us forward. And I think in many cases, I think it's easy enough to come into, at least for people who grow up with enough shared base of values and perhaps principles, conscience in most cases will give you the answer. And I think consensus is easily found, at least amongst, like we're all Americans in this room here today.
No, I don't know. I'm sorry. I disagree with that, Rami. I think that, all people have their own ideals about everything. And the thing is, there's too much of an expectation that happens in our society that we all are thinking the same thing. It's like when you say, talk about kind people, the thing is, naturally, you're thinking about compassionate people. But the reality of it is, a person's kindness is merely a representation of the kind of person that person may be. Now, the thing is, what one person considers kind will reflect totally on his environmental habituation. So the thing is, if he lives in a world of, say like people that are part of Antifa, I mean, to them, in the foundation, they believe that what they're doing is right. But on the other hand, to a person on the outside, when they see them taking and destroying different things, on the other hand, they think they're not really a very kind person. But their own view is that they are. And that there is an extreme of looking at kindness, but each person has their own kind of kindness that, they expect other people to be like them. And the reality of it is, nobody is like them. Everybody is their own individual. And that's why everything gets broken down into individualism and collectivism. And you need both of them in order to take and be part of society. They both are parts of society. So, it's too easy to take and say that, everybody thinks the same, because everybody doesn't think the same. Everybody is really quite extreme, but needs to be acknowledged and also have their ideals put forward to understand, so that we can communicate to one another. Unfortunately, in our society today, because of the cancel culture, people are scared. People are scared to talk about what they think is right. So, the thing is that these things never come out, and everything has to be assumed as to what everybody thinks, which is very much a fallacy, a very, very bad thing. Because when you're thinking that, you're putting yourself upon the other person, within the other person, thinking you know what they're thinking, which is really a lie, So,
I agree. I think there are various degrees of morality. And I think that sometimes people think, like, for instance, they're giving 50% when they're really giving 20%. And I think that we all have different ways of being brought up. And that's why there are stop signs, and that's why there are stoplights. And I think as you go through life, you find that some people take advantage of others, and that's why we have the rule of law.
Right. Yeah, the rule of law of a government is basically to take and, guide the people, to prevent people from taking advantage of one another. But the only thing is, in our society today, everything has gone the extreme opposite. Just like when the internet first came out, everybody say, man, this is just like the wild, wild west. Well, the thing is, the way I look at it, still is, because of the fact that
they're taking advantage of us now.
Yeah, right.
They're taking advantage of us.
Not only the corporations are taking advantage of us, but we're being taught to take advantage of one another, through these, robocalls and all these different things that we get with people soliciting, to play upon our weaknesses, the things that they could take and, wiggle in there to take advantage of other people. We're not being taught to have the respect for one another that really is necessary for a good moral society and government to live by.
And it almost seems like we're at the verge of a civil war. Even in our own family, my husband and I today, we're talking, and there's the one side of the family, the daughter-in-law and her family, are very into the liberal part, and we're not. And we've actually been asked to take ourselves off of their connection with Facebook because they don't want to, even though we're polite, they don't want to hear what we have to say. It gives them too much anxiety.
Right. That's true. And the thing is, well, to me, I personally think Facebook is nothing but a cesspool of arrogance anyway, but that's just my opinion of it. But the thing is, what happens is, everybody gets to the point of this cancel culture within inside of them. And what they do is basically cancel out anybody else's opinion if it's not in agreement with their own. And when that happens, I mean, you have, the pride and arrogance of that person, unable to even learn anything new. And,
But isn't it funny that it's only happening on one side of the aisle?
Oh, yeah, I know. Right. Well, that's because of the way that if you take a democracy lends itself to the desires of the people. So the thing is, whatever a person wants, if they get enough people behind them, they can get it. And the democracy actually feeds the arrogance of the individual, where they really can't learn anything from it, except for what they want, and then voting for that through the society or group that they're in order to get it. The only thing is, in this situation now, they have the support of, like Facebook. When they put on Facebook, do you like this or don't like it? And you get a whole bunch of likes. So the thing is, a lot of times people will say, yeah, I like that, just saying that they like it because they like you or something. They don't want to say anything bad about you. So the thing is, all the likes become something that's artificial. And even the dislikes, if somebody says dislike, you never learn what is disliked about the like or about the presentation, but only the fact that it's no good. So right away, all this whole thing does is create a separation of, hey, you can like it or you don't like it. And if you don't like it, I don't want no part of you. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah, and to me, all the big tech companies and the pharmacy companies, they have so much power now that for those of us who don't, want to be, well, we're trying to be polite, they're overpowering us.
Right. The thing is, the medical group, as far as I'm concerned, the medical tyranny that's going on in this country is going on for now years. Because at one time when I was born in 1946, and back in the early 50s and so on and so forth, it was against the law for doctors and these medical companies to advertise anything on TV. I mean, they could advertise aspirin and toothpaste and simple stuff. But the thing is, when they became eligible to take and advertise, all these, cures or whatever they may have for cancer or whatever, the thing is, then they put all this stuff out there to advertise. And if somebody's got some symptom, the first thing they're doing is running to the doctor to have it checked out. And, the thing is, the attorneys are just as bad, because at one time, attorneys could not advertise on TV. And they did that for a purpose, because the thing is, they exploit the legal profession, through their, lawsuits and everything in order to get money. I mean,
they used to call it ethics.
Right.
I used to work for attorneys back in the day when they couldn't advertise. The only way they could really get new clients was they would teach, a class at a university at night, or
Right.
they would get involved in the, the groups around town, or volunteer their time. And they totally changed everything.
Yeah.
It's all about money.
That's it. Exactly. That's what it was all about, is money. And the thing is, the more laws that they put out, the more laws they want to make, because the more money they make in their pockets. And they're not interested in the fact that whether it benefits the society or the government at all. It more is about benefiting themselves and putting money in their pocket. Whether it becomes, I don't put the doctors in the same category as attorneys, but I do put the pharmaceutical companies in the same category as attorneys, because the thing is, they're there with their money, just to take and create tyranny in the lives of people. Because if you got a stomach ache, they want you to go and, have you spend all kinds of money at the doctor in order to find out what's wrong with you, and then put a label on it to make you feel like you're labeled the rest of your life with whatever you may have. And so you're constantly thinking about whatever it is that they say that you may have. And then, it becomes something that's very bad in your life, because that's all you think about.
And sometimes we may be left wondering, to what degree have news organizations become just an extension of the pharmaceutical industry's advertising?
Well, they are. Because they pay, they all get the money.
But so that I get a sense of accomplishment, where we've come to the end, and I want to make sure that we've completed paragraph 6 here of the work. Paine is saying that security is the true design and end of government. So that's something we can agree on?
No, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, the thing is, you have to have government of some sort, but, the thing is, it should be practiced with common sense. And once again, if you tie this into the Declaration of Independence of Thomas Paine, or not Thomas Paine, but Thomas Jefferson's original draft, the whole thing really makes sense, because of the fact that you're talking about the separation between nature and nature's God, and also the people that are making the laws. Because people, when they make the laws, they want to do things for the benefit of their own selves. So, in doing so, that's where everything goes amok. Just like the attorneys being involved in, like in politics and representing
we have to make sure other people, David, have a chance because
Okay.
we've got about 2 minutes remaining. Plus, my wife is calling me.
Okay.
Mike
Go
and
ahead.
Dot. Security being the
Well-
true design end of government that's the question.
Well, Paine remarks that government, one of the things government does is it helps restrain our vices. That is the way that individuals in society will take advantage of other individuals. I think that also another legitimate use of government is to deal with problems and projects that society once dealt with, which are too large for individuals or most organizations on their own to deal with. For example, dealing with this pandemic is something where I think it's very legitimate to have the government spending a lot of effort and attention and time. When we come to climate change, I think that's a project that we probably need the government to work on.
I don't agree on the climate change part. I think that we as Americans are probably one of the cleanest in the world, and we're paying for everybody else, including China and Russia, to clean up their act, and they're not doing it.
Now they're building more coal factories over in or generators over in China. That's so sick. But they're selling us all the solar panels though too. I mean,
The ones that freeze when the cold comes and we don't have a backup now.
yeah, that's right. Like in Texas, right? That's so stupid. Okay.
Okay.
Those poor
Well,
people.
I think that's all the time we have for this evening, unless anyone has any other final ideas. Oh, let's talk just in terms of time. Do we like this time of holding it Tuesday at 7 p.m.?
That's
7
fine
to 8?
that's fine with me.
Good with me.
How about yourself, Mike?
No problem.
Thanks. All right. Well, we'll pick up on this either in a week or two, and I'll keep you all notified.